A Mississippi Democrat is learning her punishment in court today for her involvement in a major voter fraud case. Courtney Rainey has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. She had been found guilty of witness intimidation in this Canton voter fraud case. Rainey was Canton's Director of Human and Cultural Needs and a school board member. She was found guilty of witness intimidation in July. This was a related article from a few months back about the same case, talking about Democrats being arrested for voter fraud and vote buying in Mississippi. The article talks about multiple officials being charged, but they highlight that the most heavily charged was Canton School Board member Courtney Rainey, who had been charged with 15 crimes related to voter fraud and paying people to vote. Rainey, they note, is a Democrat. Courtney Rainey, according to the indictment, paid Emma Owsley to vote in the Canton municipal elections last year. She tried to get Owsley to change her story so she would not get caught. Another indictment charges her with giving a Walmart gift card in exchange for another vote in the same election from a different individual. She had also paid this person through the use of flood relief for her vote. The indictment charges her with conspiring with Andrew Grant to commit voter fraud. Democrat Andrew Grant. They talk more about these other Democrats involved in the same scheme in this article, including Grant. There are other officials that have already been charged in the same case, and one recent update, Canton Police Chief Vicki McNeil stepping down from her seat, citing her health as the reason that she was stepping down. Meanwhile, she'd been charged with voter fraud as well, and they said following her resignation, in return for her stepping down, all charges against McNeil in the Canton voter fraud case had been dropped. Her trial was scheduled to begin Monday morning. It's an article from September 9th. So she had a trial date set for last week, and she ended up resigning. Looks like the health reasons that she gave were a cover-up. Probably had something to do with a deal where if she willingly stepped down, these charges were dropped as a result, it looks like. Also charged was Andrew Grant. They mentioned this election that took place last week to replace Andrew Grant, the former Canton alderman, Democrat who pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit voter fraud. He resigned as an alderman in August and agreed not to seek office in the future. There had been results already, and they're currently saying that that election is headed to a runoff, which is scheduled for October 8th. More info here on Courtney Rainey from this article from just after the guilty verdict. That was before today's sentencing. They were talking about Courtney Rainey being found guilty on one count. They also point out that Rainey was running in an election for Madison County Justice Court Judge in District 2. It's a campaign flyer with Rainey here. And they also mention this related trial, this other Democrat, Andrew Grant. Canton Alderman Andrew Grant pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit voter fraud last month. He had been sentenced to 5 years with 5 years suspended and 5 years probation. He will step down from his role as alderman and will not seek political office in the future. And that election we saw took place very recently and is headed to a runoff to see who will actually be replacing Andrew Grant. That was the result of the sentencing of Andrew Grant last month before the more recent news today. This most recent update on the case from today, 15-year prison sentence for Courtney Rainey. Of course, likely not the result that her attorneys were hoping for. Carlos Tanner was one of Rainey's lawyers who last month was claiming that she was not guilty of what she had been accused of, as juries were hung on voter fraud charges. This was after she received the guilty verdict for witness intimidation and not guilty of conspiracy to commit voter fraud. Carlos Tanner, her attorney, was still making these arguments at the time. Tanner saying that Rainey was targeted when she ran for office. Rainey was taken into custody after the guilty verdict last week in her first trial. Tanner says that he was working to have her released from jail. Rainey was being held at the Madison County Detention Center during this time while she was still awaiting her sentencing before today. Another article from late last year, as this case was still developing, expands on how big of an issue this is in Mississippi, talking about Canton specifically. Article opens saying, in a town that calls itself the Hollywood of Mississippi, people say for years that they've been hearing tales of dirty politics like campaigns buying votes with cash or beer, but it wasn't until the past few days when a former police chief, a former fire chief, and some others were arrested on voter fraud charges that locals realized just how deep the problems might go. Article also mentions Rainey as being one of the 6 people who were arrested. This is an article from December of 2018 talking about the case, and these 5 other individuals all arrested and indicted by a grand jury on election fraud charges. We've already looked at how some of these charges, what ended up happening with a few of these charges, including Vicki McNeil, who had to step down from her role as Canton police chief and the board of aldermen. She stepped down and had her charges dropped. It looks like it was kind of a deal. Had these charges dropped after she resigned. She faced 4 counts of voter fraud, was alleged to have illegally helped people cast absentee ballots when she was running for re-election. McNeil declined to comment at the time and was released on a $4,000 bail right after her arrest late last year. Also, former Canton Fire Chief Kerry Johnson had been arrested, accused of trying to influence a voter by promising beer and offering money to 2 others to sway their votes. The heaviest charges were against Courtney Rainey, appointed to the city school board and Canton's Director of Human and Cultural Needs. Other accusations that had been included in the indictment are listed here, including accusations of bribing voters, improperly helping people fill out absentee ballots, voting despite being convicted of disqualifying felonies, and voting even though they lived outside the city or voting district. Meanwhile, 2 other people charged in the same voting fraud case, Donnell Robinson and Jennifer Robinson, also recently pleaded guilty to misdemeanors and were placed into a pre-trial diversion program, meaning once they complete the 1-year program, they will no longer have the felony charges on their records. In June, Valerie Smith, retired Canton City Clerk, pleaded guilty to violation of voter registration statutes and was placed on 1 year of probation. So the mainstream media continues to run articles pretending that voter fraud is not the major problem that it is, and we continue to see these types of cases. Looks like there is actually a major sentence as far as this news today, this 15-year prison sentence for Courtney Rainey. Let me know what you think about that and any of the related indictments to this case and other voter fraud cases. Also, the sentencing against Andrew Grant last month. And what do you think about the Canton police chief, McNeil, who resigned but had her charges dropped in the case? Let me know what you think about any aspect of this. Very interesting story. I will continue to follow this and follow up with any related updates. If you could leave a like on this video, that's greatly appreciated, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Also, in the video description are links to my Patreon account, one place where you can support the channel, patreon.com/realityreader. Even $1 or $2 makes a huge difference, helps me keep talking about these issues. There's also a link to my PayPal where you can support the channel directly, paypal.me/realityreader. I'll follow up soon. Thanks, everyone.